There's a word that came up in a recent interview about this case that I hadn't heard applied to it before. Cult. I know how that sounds. I know what happens the moment you introduce that word into a true crime conversation. It tends to pull everything toward the dramatic, toward compounds and charismatic leaders and mass movements. I had that reaction myself, honestly, the first time I heard it used here. But I want to walk through where it actually came from, because I don't think it's coming from nowhere. A woman named Daniela Mestine Young, a Harvard-trained organizational psychologist who also served 6.5 years as a military intelligence officer, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan, was interviewed by journalist Annette Levy of Law and Crime about this case specifically. And when asked whether the dynamics publicly known about the Siders family reminded her of anything she'd studied, she said this on camera. "I definitely think that this family seems like some kind of single-family cult." I want to spend today actually unpacking what she means by that, because her background is genuinely relevant to why that assessment carries weight. She was born into a closed religious group, 3rd generation, and has spoken publicly about surviving it, getting herself expelled around age 15 specifically so she could leave, ending up with almost no conventional education, and eventually building an academic and military career around understanding exactly this kind of dynamic from both the inside and the research side. Before I go further, the standard context that matters every time we cover this case. All 4 adults charged have pleaded not guilty. There have been no convictions. A grand jury process is still pending. Nothing in this video is a verdict about anyone's guilt or innocence. What follows comes from Daniela's on-camera interview, from public statements by Elizabeth Siders' attorney, Tommy Staley, and from court records and confirmed reporting. So let's start with what she actually means by cult, because I think most people's mental picture of that word gets in the way of understanding her point. When most of us hear it, we picture something large and visible. A compound, a charismatic leader, mass followings. That's not the definition she's working from. Her definition, drawn from years of academic research into high-control groups, is much smaller and much more uncomfortable because of how ordinary it can look from the outside. A group, and she's clear that this can be as few as 2 people, using coercive, manipulative tactics to exploit someone. That's the core of it. No compound required. No large following required. She calls the smallest version a one cult, a single relationship or a single household where one part of the structure engineers a controlled version of reality for the other part to live inside. Same underlying dynamic, just smaller in scale. I want to walk through the specific tactics she outlines because I think applying them directly to what's actually documented about this case is more useful than just repeating the label. Isolation is the first one. Investigators and the Ohio Attorney General's office have confirmed the family lived across multiple counties over roughly 2 decades, largely outside contact with school systems, medical follow-up, or any consistent outside institution. The prosecutor has described their life as insular, hidden from the wider community. Several of the children were briefly enrolled during one remote learning school year, and then never attended in person again, before or after. Controlling information and worldview is the second. Christina Siders has documented religious imagery on her public social media. Elizabeth, through her attorney, has stated that she personally believes in having a large family and sees people as a blessing. Whether religion functioned as part of a broader closed worldview inside that household, as opposed to simply being personal faith, is a real, open question, and Daniela's framework treats it as exactly that. A question, not a conclusion. She's clear that religion isn't required for these dynamics to exist, but that it's often used as a convenient structure for discouraging questions, because it comes with a built-in reason not to doubt authority. The third tactic she describes involves the use of a person's labor and body within the group's structure, and she specifically mentioned that repeated early pregnancy is a documented pattern researchers associate with high-control groups because it deepens someone's practical and emotional dependence on the structure over time. Here's what's publicly documented about Elizabeth Siders specifically, stated plainly. Once, she married into the Siders family as a young teenager with parental consent and had her first child shortly after. Over the following years, she gave birth to a large number of children. That timeline, entering the household as a minor and remaining inside it into adulthood, is central to why Daniela's framework raises the question of whether ordinary assumptions about choice and consent apply the same way they would for someone who entered that structure as an adult. I think that's the actual, careful version of the question worth asking, rather than dwelling repeatedly on the specific numbers involved. The point isn't the count. The point is the mechanism. What nearly 2 decades inside a single, closed household structure, starting before adulthood, might do to a person's frame of reference for what a normal life even looks like. Daniela's broader point, based on both her research and her own experience, is that people generally don't ask, why didn't they just leave, once they understand how coercive control actually works. You don't leave a reality you've been systematically taught is the only safe one. From the inside, it doesn't register as control. It registers as simply how life is. There's a detail worth including here. Elizabeth's brother, Jeremy, posted publicly after her arrest, describing her as having been, in his word, indoctrinated. He didn't elaborate on what he meant by that specifically. He also noted that he and Elizabeth had been estranged for roughly 15 years before recently reconnecting, not long before investigators executed the warrant that led to this case becoming public. Whether that timing is meaningful or coincidental isn't something anyone outside the investigation can say with confidence. I want to address the question of leadership directly, because it's one of the more genuinely complicated parts of applying this framework here. When asked who the central figure might be in a structure with 4 adult defendants rather than 1, Daniela pointed out that most documented high-control groups do have some kind of hierarchy, but that hierarchy often includes multiple people in different roles, not always one clearly dominant individual. She referenced how, in some well-documented cases, a nominal leader can become largely dependent on the people around them, even as the surrounding structure keeps functioning. Applied here, that means the actual distribution of control inside the Siders household, who is directing what, and who was, in Daniela's words, potentially both inside the structure and shaped by it rather than fully directing it, is something the ongoing investigation, not this video, will have to establish. Gary Siders Sr., Gary Siders Jr., Christina Siders, and Elizabeth Siders occupied different roles and, presumably, different levels of documented involvement. Special Prosecutor Annika Collins has to build a case that accounts for all 4 separately. This is where the legal relevance actually comes in, and I think it's worth explaining clearly rather than leaving it vague. Elizabeth's attorney, Tommy Staley, has filed for both a competency evaluation and, separately, an evaluation to determine whether she may not be criminally responsible due to a mental health condition affecting her understanding of right and wrong at the time in question. Judge Lena Featherwolf Rogers ordered both evaluations, with results expected within 30 days. Similar competency evaluations have been ordered for all 4 defendants, meaning each of their attorneys, independently, raised concerns serious enough to request this step. Daniela's framework offers one possible lens for what those evaluators might be assessing, specifically regarding Elizabeth. If someone enters a closed, high-control environment as a young teenager and remains inside it for close to 2 decades, a forensic evaluation of how that person understands the world and their own choices within it may look meaningfully different than it would for someone who spent that same period with normal outside contact. That's not a conclusion about guilt or innocence. It's a factual question about psychological development under specific documented conditions, and it's exactly the kind of question competency and sanity evaluations exist to examine. I want to be direct about what this framework does and doesn't establish. It doesn't prove intent or the absence of it for anyone. It doesn't resolve the criminal case. What Daniela's analysis offers is a way of understanding the how. How a household this size stayed largely invisible to schools, hospitals, and social services for years, and why the people inside a structure like that often can't recognize it as unusual from within until something external intervenes. She made one more point that I think is worth including because it complicates the picture rather than simplifying it. She described a documented pattern among people who leave high-control environments that some unconsciously seek out similarly rigid structures afterward, because total structure, even an unhealthy one, can feel more navigable than ordinary life without it. She described experiencing something like that herself after leaving the environment she grew up in. That's not a claim about anyone in this specific case. It's additional context for how deeply these dynamics can shape a person's decision-making long after the original structure is gone. Where this actually leaves the case, legally, is this. The cult framework potentially cuts in two directions at once, and I think that's worth sitting with rather than smoothing over. For prosecutors, if a coercive leadership structure existed, that could support the argument that certain individuals bear greater direct responsibility for what happened. For Elizabeth's defense specifically, the same framework supports the sanity evaluation already underway. The argument that her capacity to understand right and wrong may have been shaped by conditions that began before she was legally an adult. Those two positions aren't contradictory. Courts deal with exactly this kind of layered complexity regularly. What the competency evaluators find over the coming weeks will matter, not just for Elizabeth's individual case, but potentially for how the broader prosecution is structured. 4 defendants, all pleaded not guilty. Competency evaluations ordered for each of them, a grand jury process still moving forward, and one expert with a genuinely rare combination of lived experience, academic training, and military analytical background, offering a framework that treats this case's complexity seriously rather than flattening it into something simpler than it actually is. I don't think cult is a word to use casually here, and I don't think this video should be the last word on whether it applies. It's one credentialed person's professional assessment based on publicly available information, not a legal finding. But I think it's a serious enough assessment from a serious enough source to be worth understanding clearly rather than dismissing on reflex. We'll keep following this case as the evaluations and eventually the grand jury process move forward, and we'll bring you what's actually confirmed, not what fits the most dramatic possible framing.